Hello, I'm Paul Priestley and this is Art History School. Today we are looking at Edward Hopper, one of the most iconic American painters of the 20th century. Despite living most of his life in the crowded, bustling city of New York, his work focuses on the solitude and isolation that many people experience in the modern world. Unlike many of his peers, he didn't explore different artistic movements during his career. In fact, his visual vocabulary hardly changed from the 1920s until his death in 1967. So why does Edward Hopper's work provoke such powerful emotional responses? And why did he have such a profound influence on American art? Well, it's time to find out. Edward Hopper was born on the 22nd of July 1882 in Nyack, New York, a small town along the Hudson River, a little north of New York City. Hopper was the second of three children and enjoyed a quiet middle-class upbringing in the same house in which his mother was brought up and his parents had been married. It was located on North Broadway in Nyack and was built by his maternal grandfather in 1858. His father, Garrett Henry Hopper, was descended from a line of successful Dutch traders and farmers and was a mild-mannered, well-liked individual. His mother, Elizabeth Griffiths Smith Hopper, had several artists in her family background, and whilst she showed an aptitude for painting and drawing in her youth, she never professionally pursued a career in art. But she did encourage Hopper from the age of 5 to paint and draw. In 1890, Hopper's father, who had been an underwear salesman, bought a hardware store in Nyack where Hopper would often help out after school. Outside of business, his father loved literature and supported his son's artistic endeavours, allowing him to use the attic in the house as a studio. It was here that Hopper would spend most of his adolescence, drawing the houses and the river he could see out of the window. By the age of 12, Hopper was already 6 feet tall. Eventually he would reach 6 feet 5 inches. This, together with his skinny physique, led to classmates derisively nicknaming him Grasshopper. As a result, he grew up feeling a growing sense of isolation that no doubt later influenced the introspection which is a hallmark of his work. In 1897, Hopper built himself a small boat. He loved sailing and for a brief period during his teenage years contemplated becoming a naval architect. Hopper's formal art training began in 1899 when he enrolled at the Correspondence School of Illustration in New York. Shortly afterwards, in 1900, he transferred to the New York School of Art, now part of the Parsons School of Design, where he came under the influence of Robert Henri, a prominent teacher and important figure in the Ashcan School of Painters. He emphasised to Hopper the importance of painting a realistic portrait of contemporary urban life. Hopper adopted the approach, but after graduation in 1906, Hopper's early attempts at a career in art were met with limited success. Consequently, he took up commercial illustration to support himself, working on magazine covers and advertisements where his experience at the School of Illustration proved invaluable. In October 1906, he moved to Paris for a brief period, where he lived with a French family at 48 Rue de la Ville. He also found time to visit England, the Netherlands and Germany, but it was Paris that influenced him most. Paris was then the centre of the art world. Perhaps surprisingly, it wasn't the avant-garde movements of the time, Fauvism and Cubism, that inspired him. Instead, he spent hours in the Louvre studying classical works and other galleries where he saw inspiration from the Impressionists and the Realists. He didn't enroll in any art school while he was there, but he did frequently paint outdoors. But despite his love of European art, he eventually found Paris a bit overwhelming, so he returned to New York early in 1907. There he continued his study of European artists, particularly the work of Edgar Degas, whose academic approach and vibrant compositions appealed to him. In 1909 and 1910, Hopper made further visits to Europe, spending most of his time in Paris. But after returning to New York, he struggled to find his voice as a painter. His early landscapes, figure studies and scenes of urban life veered towards the academic and didn't attract much attention. In 1913, Hopper moved into an unassuming top-floor apartment at 3 Washington Square North in Manhattan, New York, where despite his later success, he would continue to live in until his death. Hopper and later even his wife were very frugal. They often wore their clothes until threadbare and cooked most of their meals from cans. If they ate out, it would be at inexpensive diners and lunch counters across the city, and even in his old age, Hopper would carry buckets of coal up 4 flights of stairs for the stove that heated his studio. A fellow artist, Martin Lewis, taught Hopper the process of etching in 1915. He soon mastered the medium and gained much of his early critical recognition from his prints. But learning how to etch had another impact on his work in that it forced him to create images more from memory rather than working en plein air or from live models. In 1918, Hopper won a poster competition held by the United States Shipping Board. The poster struck a chord with the public and earned him some early critical acclaim. His first solo exhibition was held in January 1920 at the Whitney Studio Club at 147 West 4th Street in New York. It was arranged by his friend the artist Guy Pen de Bois and featured a series of urban landscapes and figures. But the paintings lacked the emotional depth and unique perspective that would later define his mature style, and consequently the works were largely ignored by the critics. However, the early 1920s did mark a significant, if gradual, turning point in Hopper's career. His exposure and study of the works of several relatively modern European artists such as Edgar Degas, combined with his own introspective nature, began to push him towards a more personal and refined vision. He began to move away from the crowded, bustling, Ashcan-influenced urban scenes of his early years to focus on quieter, more isolated subjects. These early experiments would set the stage for the breakthrough into his own distinctive style, and once that style was established, Hopper barely changed it for the rest of his life. Essentially, he would work methodically, combining sketches from life with imagined compositions before carefully constructing a final composition and completing the painting in his studio. In 1923, Hopper married fellow artist Josephine Nivinson, who became both his muse and a vital source of emotional support throughout his career. Jo, as Hopper called her, appeared in many of his works, and their relationship, though complex, played a significant role in shaping Hopper's artistic vision. When they married, Josephine was already a successful artist and actress in her own right, and during 1923 she was invited to show some of her watercolours in a group exhibition of American and European artists at the Brooklyn Museum. She had a word with the curators and persuaded them to show 6 of Hopper's watercolours as well. When the exhibition closed, the Brooklyn Museum became the first institution to purchase one of Hopper's paintings. Josephine became an indispensable element of his practice. Not only did she pose for nearly all the female figures in his paintings, but she also assisted him with arranging the props and settings for his studio sessions. She encouraged him to work more extensively in watercolour and was responsible for keeping meticulous records of his completed artworks, exhibitions and sales. By the late 1920s, Hopper's style had matured. His use of light and shadow had become a central element of his work, and it was often used to reflect and enhance the psychological isolation of his subjects. His subject matter increasingly focused on urban and rural American scenes, but the emphasis on busy streets or crowded environments disappeared. Instead, Hopper's paintings focus more on isolated figures in quiet spaces or figures on the outskirts of city life. 1927 saw the creation of one of his most famous works of the 1920s, Automat. It depicts a lone woman sitting in a diner, gazing vacantly down at her cup. The painting, like many of Hopper's works, conveys a sense of emotional emptiness and detachment, suggesting an existential loneliness that became a hallmark of his work. It was first displayed on Valentine's Day 1927 at the opening of Hopper's second solo show at the Wren Galleries in New York. It sold in April of that year for $1,200, which would be worth around $20,000 today. In December of 1929, several of his paintings were included in the Paintings by 19 Living Artists exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. 1929 also saw the creation of another of the seminal paintings of that period, Chop Suey. The painting, which depicts two women sitting at a table in a Chinese restaurant, employs the bold use of light and shadow and offers a glimpse into Hopper's growing interest in capturing the alienating effects of modern life. New York chop suey restaurants were popular lunchtime eateries at the time, where workers often grabbed a bite to eat. In 1930, he received a major commission to paint a mural for the New York City Public Library, which was the start of a period when his work began to increasingly attract the attention of major art collectors and critics. During the 1930s, Hopper worked prolifically, producing both large-scale works and smaller pieces that reflected his growing concerns with the solitude and isolation of the modern world. This projection of introspection manifested itself in images of lone figures, most often women, near windows in stark rooms. These images more likely represent Hopper's preference for quiet and thoughtful reflection and self-examination rather than a perceived representation of his own feelings of loneliness. The Hoppers spent nearly every summer from 1930 through to the 1950s in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, particularly in the town of Truro, where they eventually built a house. Here, Hopper, and wherever he travelled, continued to explore the themes that now characterised his work, namely the tensions between individuals, particularly men and women, the conflict between tradition and progress in both rural and urban settings, and the moods evoked by the various times of day. A classic example of this can be seen in the work Gas of 1940. The painting is of a small garage or gas station in an isolated rural setting with a single figure attending the pump. The scene beautifully evokes a sense of a life of quiet desolation, but perhaps it is Hopper's most famous work, the Nighthawks of 1942, that sums up the loneliness that can be encountered not only in rural areas but in big cities too. In the painting, we see three customers in an all-night diner in New York. They are sitting at the counter opposite a waiter. Each person appears lost in their own thoughts and disengaged from each other. The composition, like most of Hopper's work, is tightly controlled. He ensures there is nothing to distract our focus from the central theme of the painting. There is no rubbish on the streets, nor doors into the diner, nor superfluous decoration, just a simple structure of geometric shapes and the contrast between the electric lighting and the night outside. It is a quiet, enigmatic scene in which we are left to imagine the lives and relationships these figures might be experiencing. During the 1940s, he visited Mexico by rail and spent time on the west coast of the United States. Later in the 1950s, he had a major retrospective exhibition at the Whitney Museum of American Art, which was later seen in Boston and Detroit. Also that year, he painted Cape Cod Morning, which shows a solitary woman standing in front of a window contemplating the outside world. The painting tells no story. Instead, the woman's tense pose creates a sense of anxious anticipation, a conflict between her seemingly caged existence and the beautiful world outside. Hopper's ability to evoke mood and atmosphere through light, colour and spatial relationships became increasingly refined during this period. In 1952, the American Federation of the Arts nominated him as one of the 4 artists to represent the United States at the Venice Biennale of that year. During the 1950s and 60s, Hopper continued to paint prolifically, though his works often became more introspective as the focus of his themes subtly changed as they became more inward-looking, reflecting his personal struggles with aging, memory and the passage of time. Where once he had depicted the world around him and the human condition so powerfully, there now seemed to be a sense of slight detachment. Perhaps this feeling was also influenced by the fact that his work had begun to lose critical favour in the art world due to the rise of abstract expressionism and later pop art. Yet despite being overtaken by the popularity of more modern movements and America experienced a period of national prosperity and cultural optimism in the 1950s and 60s, his art never lacked popular appeal and still resonated with those who understood that the individual could still suffer a powerful sense of isolation even in booming post-war America. In 1960, Alfred Hitchcock was inspired to have his famous Bates house in the film Psycho based on Hopper's house by the railroad painting which he produced in 1925, which is now in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Hopper's later years were marked by a decline in health, although he did continue to paint until his death at the age of 84 on the 15th of May 1967. He died of natural causes in his studio in 3 Washington Square, North New York City, and was buried in the family plot at Oak Hill Cemetery in Nyack, New York, his birthplace. His wife, Josephine, died 10 months later and was buried alongside him. One of Hopper's final paintings, Two Comedians of 1965, was intentionally painted as a sort of farewell. Interestingly, in contrast to the numerous paintings he produced of non-communicative couples, his painting depicts a tall male comedian representing Hopper, holding the hand of a diminutive comedian who represents his wife, Josephine. It seems in this painting Hopper was suggesting his final acceptance of life's ironies. Edward Hopper's influence on American art and culture cannot be underestimated. His ability to evoke a profound sense of isolation by his use of light, shadow, space and mood made his works deeply evocative. They aptly described the universal human condition of alienation and our quest for meaning in a rapidly changing world. Edward Hopper was one of the most significant American artists of the 20th century. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you really enjoyed it. If you have, perhaps you might consider buying me a coffee. You can do so by clicking the little thanks button which is below the video screen here. That would be much appreciated. Well, until the next video, I shall say goodbye.